first, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I wanted to get to know you a little bit. We did have our initial conversation, but I wanted to talk about, where are you from? You're a Navy veteran, so what led you to
Yeah.
join the Navy? Let's start there.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'd say serving my country always seemed important to me since childhood, right? Um, I don't know. I guess I've always kind of looked at it from a philosophical perspective, that we have an all voluntary military for a reason, but then I felt personally obligated that if I'm able and willing, I should serve my country. Um, not a whole lot of pressure or anything from family, nothing like that. My dad didn't serve. He was drafted in Vietnam, but had a um, college deferment, and then it was canceled before he finished college, so he never actually served. So the pressure wasn't there, I guess, but there was interest for me. And my interest originally, to be honest with you, was Air Force.
Yeah.
To end up in the Navy was a little unexpected, but when I was doing research and okay, so out of high school, I almost enlisted. Right out of high school, almost went into, the recruiter, I guess, basically talked me out of it. Unfortunately, he was trying to hit his quota, so
Yeah.
I went to the recruiting office, I took the ASVAB test and everything, and then the job, he told me, well, with that ASVAB score, this is the job you have to do, and I was like, I don't get to choose? I got a perfect score. How do I not get to choose my job when I get to score that high? And he's like, yeah, no, you have to have this job. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that job, so have a nice day.
Yeah.
So then I ended up going to college and stuff. And while I was in college, a wife got pregnant with our first child, and life kind of changed. And it got to the point where I wasn't going to be able to stay in college if I didn't have some income. So then I started looking at Navy programs and other branches of the military to see what might exist to help me finish college. And I found the nuclear program in the Navy and submarines. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Which I was right, but I was wrong. You know how it is.
Yeah.
So I ended up finding this program. It was a great program, helped me finish college. I was earning a paycheck while in college, and then went straight to training after I finished college. So then was, commissioned and got my uniforms and started my service. But it all kind of started technically while I was still in college, and then went into training after that. So it was because it was the science and the engineering piece of the nuclear power program and submarines that just seemed so cool to me that that's why I went that route instead.
Yeah, you guys are the smartest of the smart, in my opinion. I have a friend who her and I met in boot camp, and she was a Navy nuke on carriers, and man,
yeah,
her and her now husband, they were both nukes, and they're just super smart. They don't even consider themselves surface Navy because of what they do. They're in the bowels of the ship. It's pretty interesting. They consider themselves submariners because they're typically below the waterline.
Well, they
yikes.
still operate in 2 dimensions. To be on a submarine, you operate in 3 dimensions.
That's
A
cool.
really, really slow moving airplane. That's the submarine. Kind of maintain altitude and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, I guess the nuke program is quantifiably, justifiably, it is the most academically difficult program in the entire military. I'm not convinced that makes us all the smartest people, but at least academically capable.
Yeah.
So
there was a joke, you knew who the nukes were because they were the ones who were the palest. They never see light. They're always working in the reactor room. We poke fun at each other, the different ratings and whatnot. But yeah, I also found it extremely impressive, especially for captains of nukes. I learned this after actually I got out, because I had been on amphibs most of my career when I was in the Navy. And
sure.
I learned that the COs, the captains of the ships, have to go through the nuclear program before they can actually command a nuclear vessel. And a lot of those commanders...
Yeah.
A
What
lot
were
of
you
those
saying?
commanders are like aviators of some sort, right? They flew planes at some
Yeah.
capacity, and then they go through the
Well,
nuke program. I'm like, that's
well, those are the
impressive.
interesting ones.
Yeah,
So on submarines, yes, any CEO of the submarine has climbed to the ranks of the submarine community, so that's obvious. But the aircraft carriers, as I recall, you have to be an aviator to be the
right.
captain of an aircraft carrier. You
Yes.
can't that no one else can be the captain of an aircraft carrier. It has to be an aviator. But to be the captain of an aircraft carrier that is nuclear powered, you also have to graduate the nuke program.
Yeah.
So the guys that when I was in the nuke school, the captains or the captains to be for aircraft carriers, they had their own wing of the school, their own
Yeah.
rooms to study in. They had tutors. Like they
Wow.
weren't going to let those guys fail.
Yeah.
Let me
Navy's
put it that way.
invested decades into them at that point, probably.
Yeah.
So where are you from originally? What part of the
Denver,
world?
Colorado area.
Oh, nice. Okay. I'm actually gonna be there next week,
Oh,
for job stuff. But yeah, that's
well,
pretty
let me know.
cool.
We'll get coffee together or something.
Oh, you're still in Denver?
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So after this, yeah, I'll shoot you a text. I'll be there like next Thursday. So
Cool.
yeah, I'll be there for the
Yeah.
whole day. I'm only flying in for the day because it's just such a
Oh,
hopper flight from California, but I'll have a ton of time in the afternoon. Um, yeah, so I
gotcha.
wanted to also okay, so you were in the Navy. You met your wife in college, or
No, I actually met her in high school.
wow, aw.
Yeah.
Okay, were you guys like high school sweethearts, or
Yep. Yep.
oh
Started
wow?
dating our senior year of high school and been together ever since.
And how many kids do you guys have together?
Two boys. They're both teenagers now.
Oh wow, okay. So are they like about to fly the coop? Like where are they? How old are they?
So 18 is the older one and 16 is the younger one. The 18-year-old
Oh
turns
wow,
19 next month, so I guess I have to get used to that, but
yeah,
still a teenager, so I'm okay. I feel like I'm going to struggle when he gets to 20 next year
yeah,
and then I'm going to be like, well, I have a son, he's not a teenager. That's
yeah,
I'm not old enough for that. Look at me. Like,
yeah.
really? Who decided that I should be in charge of other human beings? Like that
Yeah.
was not an intelligent. I don't know where that choice got made. I guess the
Yeah.
Navy started it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the adulting aspect of it can be jarring. But
Yeah,
is he going to college as well?
sort of. So actually, our whole family, all four of us, are moving to Portugal at the end of August.
Oh, wow. So is he so they're all going, oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So the
Yeah, and
18, soon to be 19-year-old, he's going to be doing a college certification kind of program out there, and then the
mhm,
younger one's doing um, equivalent of high school.
yeah. Why Portugal?
It's a fair question. I guess it took a while for us to sort of settle on or decide on uh, Portugal as the official, for sure, destination. I mean, it goes back, I guess, the whole story. Like, I mean, I guess we've got time. That's the point of this conversation. So I'll go back a little bit. My wife and I had always wanted the experience of living overseas. I volunteered for orders every time I had the chance in the Navy to get stationed in Japan and Germany, Italy. Um, I ended up getting orders to Japan, but a month before we were supposed to move, needs of the Navy, you know how that goes, and they sent me to Virginia instead. So at this point, I've never actually been to Japan, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Japan and Virginia, not the same. Um, so I did not get the experience of living in Japan, but we've always wanted to. Like I said, we volunteered and have tried for it multiple times. And then recent times, like I guess at first we were thinking like, let's just hang out in the U.S. and stay put for a while, because I moved 7 times in 7 years
Mhm.
for Big Brother Navy, but um, so we were trying to stay put and like maybe just let the kids finish high school and then figure it out. And and the kids were interested in making it happen at this point. And I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, like the subject matter of my book, the politics involved, like politics is certainly part of the motivation to leave now, I guess you might say. And
Yeah.
So yeah, we started the process, I guess, about a year ago of looking at if we could move anywhere, where would we go?
So you were deciding on moving to Portugal, and some of the things that you were considering were just the politics, which is also a part of your book,
Yeah.
of the U.S. Um, so what other countries did you consider before landing on Portugal?
Yeah, we started with places like Norway, Ireland, Iceland, maybe Sweden, Switzerland came up somewhere in there. The Netherlands came up, um, France, and we even looked at like Uruguay. Um,
But
I think there were a
predominantly
couple
Europe.
others.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a there's a few more in there somewhere that came up at least briefly. I think the ultimate like deciding factor on most of it was kind of the process for the visas.
Hmm.
Um, so in a lot of countries in the European Union and Europe in general, the best and maybe only way to get a visa is if you first get a job offer, and then
All
you'll
right.
get the visa kind of built in. But getting the job offer is complicated because most of those countries have rules around, like, those companies can't offer a job to an American, for example, unless they can show that there's a shortage for what they're hiring for. And most of those countries, like Ireland, Norway, etc., they have a lot of the high tech skill set. So
Right.
it's hard to show that the skill set is in shortage, and then if there is, like, there's obviously a lot of competition from Americans and other immigrants who want to go to those places. So, and my goal also was to not have to work. Like, I want to kind of transition to being a full-time author and
Hmm.
start working on my next book. I won't call it a sequel exactly, but you know,
Yeah.
nonfiction doesn't, I feel like, doesn't have sequels. Like, it's just continuing the
Well,
story.
but then you have folks. Well, it's more of an autobiography. I was thinking of what's his face, Stan Lee. He had because he lived to be like 80. He wrote his biography when he was like 50, so he had to come out with a sequel
Yeah,
essentially for
I
the
guess so.
second half of his life. Um, yeah, no, so I do know of a decent number of veterans who like John Davis, who are, expats. They are veterans who have left the United States. And I know for John, he will live in country for whatever number of days the visa allows,
Hmm.
a visitor to be there or tourist, which is like, I think in Dominican Republic, it's like 90 days. I could be making that up. So on like the 89th day he would leave, you have to pay for every day that you were there when you leave. And then he'll come back to the United States for like a week and then he'll go back rather than applying for citizenship or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting that you chose Europe because I know most of the veterans that I know that have left are in like Costa Rica, Thailand, the Philippines,
Yeah,
Colombia, uh, the Dominican Republic, Peru. I know a couple of veterans who have moved to Peru.
interesting.
Um,
I don't think
yeah,
I considered Peru.
one of the writers for W3 Magazine, my magazine, Luke Jensen, he's a Marine Corps, then Army veteran, moved to Peru. I believe he's in Colombia now. But John Davis, he went from Dominican Republic to Colombia, and then through him, I know of a couple others that, you know, but we all know the veterans who moved to the Philippines, right? A few in Thailand. I have some Air Force friends who decided to like stay in South Korea, which
Yeah.
is an interesting choice. But yeah, I think Portugal is the best place, not just because of their awesome extraditionary laws, right? Like you can't be extradited from Portugal. So it's also like a safe haven for most for most folks.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just so rich with history. I
Yeah.
am a big World War II buff, and there's so much World War II history there, like Soviet, pretty much from the Soviet side and all the bases that they set up, the mines that they set up, like a lot of the stuff that they did in Portugal. And I'm still learning about it, but you don't hear about Portugal in the history books a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as in the Navy, we heard maybe a little bit. because Portugal has such a rich history of seafaring
Right.
discovery um, and inventions and stuff like that benefited sailing ships and navigation and stuff for centuries. So, but some of the stuff that I learned just in the short time that I've visited there, like Portugal for decades was the only Western country that had found the navigational routes to Japan. So Portugal and
Oh.
Japan have this like lengthy history of trade and diplomacy between them. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating is like when you think of tempura, that's like this like definitively Japanese cuisine style, right? And the Portuguese introduced tempura to Japan.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Who knew, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have never been. I've watched probably too many documentaries on World War II, and the ones that do mention Portugal, will visit some of those sites and landmarks. And
Yeah,
I'm like, man, that is just a pretty country. Plus, it's close to everything, right? Everything's a hopper flight once you're in Europe for the most part.
yeah.
I
Just,
had
just
actually considered like Oslo or even Switzerland, like Geneva, when I had
yeah.
considered leaving the United States, which I still am. But yeah, so that's also were you able to get a job? Are you still in the engineering field? Um, or
No, I mean, I worked in the tech industry for a while for like program management.
Mhm.
So not an engineer directly, but working with engineers and sort of being that go between the super heavy head technical people and the leadership. I was always that kind of middle person. But at this point, like I've transitioned fully to first I do some advocacy work with veterans.
Mhm.
So I do like I help veterans deal with the VA basically.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And then being an author. So those are my
Yeah.
primary things at this point. So no, I'm not going to be doing a traditional style job in Portugal at this point. Um, we'll see how long that lasts. I don't know, but that's where I'm
Yeah.
at for now.
Does your wife work?
Sort of, she's self-employed, so I mean, yes, she definitely works, but
Yeah.
not for like
Good
a
for her. Yeah.
company or whatever. So she's a photographer, so that's what she does.
Oh, she's gonna love it over there, and I bet. Is she like a nature photographer, or is she like what kind of?
More like portraiture, like kids and pets and families, and
Oh, that's awesome.
a big part of her business here was like senior photos for high school people and family portraiture, stuff like that.
What an awesome talent. I
Yeah.
um I have this stupid fancy camera that I can't figure out how to use, so it's always on auto. Um, but folks like her,
Nothing
actual
wrong with that.
photographers, yeah, start YouTube channels and teach people how to take photographs, and that's how I learn. But yeah, so I want to get into the author piece a little bit. When did you start writing?
Hmm.
Have you always been an author, or have you always written pieces?
I've always had some kind of enjoyment in writing, I guess, even like high school essays and stuff like that. My dad was an English teacher, high school English teacher for 20 years. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. So he gave me an appreciation for it at least. But no, I haven't been a writer until recently, I guess, by any kind of professional sense of the word. Um, but it goes back to my military service for sure. So when I first took the oath, and the oath the oath is to the Constitution, whether it's the
Mhm.
oath of enlistment or the um, oath of office for officers, like the same oath basically is to the Constitution, to a document, right? And it's not like it was just fascinating to me when I took that oath. Like it's not it's not a specific piece of paper like that particular copy of the Constitution, like it's to the Constitution as an idea, right? And that's what was fascinating to me, not to a particular person or office or anything like that, but this oath to the document itself that provides the entire foundation of our country and our government. Um, so to me, that needed to be studied. I had to I had to read into that a little bit, and that took me down some deep rabbit holes. Like that I mention in sort of the introduction to my book. I talk about studying John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the Baron de Montesquieu and these like brilliant thinkers in the realm of Enlightenment philosophy that was kind of the foundation that all of the founding fathers of the United States had studied, and became the informative. Like the Enlightenment philosophy definitely informed the philosophies communicated in the Declaration of Independence and how they structured the Constitution to be, by, of, and for the people. All of it sourced in Enlightenment philosophy. So studying all of that, I guess, for a long time, that was my hobby, you might say. It was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And then the direction of things in our country in the last 10 years, and particularly the outcome of the 2024 election, was what forced my mind into a place where I have to write this stuff down. I have to communicate this stuff. I have to share what I've learned in these studies, because we've committed extreme departures from our founding principles, and we don't seem to be aware of it. Like, we're not even having conversations around that, right? Like, when we have these political conversations, like, this is what I think really motivated me to write the book, is that I listened to the political conversations throughout the election cycle in 2024, and like the missing piece of the conversation seemed to be our history, right?
Yeah.
What is the true history of the United States? What is the actual founding principles on which everything else is built? I don't know what I was trying to say, built and written at the same time. You know what I mean? But how do we define those founding principles? Like, we can't just say liberty, right? Like, everybody loves to throw that one around. It's like, oh, I'm a patriot because I support freedom. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, what is freedom when you really get down to it and define it in a way that, like, American structures support, or at least the theoretical structures. I guess case in point would be like, freedom only exists if all of us are free, because you being free is great, but if other people in your society are not free to live by the same desire, the same pursuit of happiness or whatever, if other people can't do that, then are you actually free? Because it could just be taken away from you at some point when that other group gets into power, and some change up happens in the government, and now it's not this group that's favored, it's that group. Like, so it's not real freedom, it's just pretend freedom. Like, so we got to define it. Like, that's what really drove me to write the book, was realizing that we weren't having those conversations at that base, fundamental, founding principle level. What is it that the United States is supposed to be built on, and how is it supposed to be operating? So that's what I had to write down and share.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King is, "A threat to democracy anywhere is a threat to democracy everywhere."
Yes.
And it, like, that undertone, although that quote has been weaponized by the powers above, but it was the similar note, right? If freedom is not achievable by everybody, then there's actually no freedom. And I love the philosophical concept of what your book represents, especially, or draws out from documents like the Constitution. Is, I had a conversation with somebody, and we use all of these adverbs, right, and these adjectives to describe certain things, and I'm like, but how are we all defining it the same way? So, like, what does liberty mean to you, and are you using it in the way that it was intended? I think we get hung up on the individual people
I
who
want to
signed the
ask you, what do
Constitution.
you
Yeah.
mean exactly by intended? Dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that using the liberty example and the Enlightenment philosophy, the undertones that are in our Constitution and in the documents that founded the country, the concept of what our great leaders were going for, the are we all defining liberty the same way? essentially. And is that what was intended when they wrote the document?
Okay.
So I
So
think
I
sometimes
challenge you to think about that a little bit
yeah,
further, because I'll to put it bluntly, who cares what was intended?
right.
Right? If some slave owning white guys said some things
Hmm.
that sounded good in principle, but they still wanted it interpreted in a way that let them keep their slaves, well, who
Yeah,
fucking cares what they actually wanted? What matters
yeah,
is the principle behind it. So when
yeah.
you say intended, it seems to imply a human intention, right? So
Hmm.
the guys who wrote the Constitution and the guys who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the ones that signed it, like, they're just a bunch of dudes. Like, they're just guys. Like, and
Hmm.
yes, they're all guys, but like, so what? They're not that important. They're not. I mean, they're important, but they're not that important, right? They're just guys. They're not
Yeah,
demigods. They're not kings. They're not monarchs. They're not ordained by God. They're none of that. They're just people. So
that's a
who
really good
cares what they
point.
intended? What
Yeah,
matters is the philosophy underneath it, and if you believe that philosophy. And if you call
yeah.
yourself an American, you have something of an obligation to learn what that philosophy is and then decide for yourself if you can actually get on board with it or not. And that's the Enlightenment philosophy that I was talking about. So the Enlightenment philosophy, like, I'll use a different example, but this one that everybody knows is like the Declaration of Independence says what? All men are created equal. That's the direct quote. Okay. So what was intended versus what does it actually mean underneath? Because the Enlightenment philosophy, the belief system that informed that quote when it was written, would better be stated in today's verbiage as all people are equal, because it doesn't matter where you're born, it doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter if you become gender fluid later in your life. It doesn't, none of those things matter, because we are all equal at the human fundamental level. That's the belief system. So
And
if you
that's
want
the
to call,
philosophy.
yeah, that's the founding principle.
Oh, okay.
So even though the
Yeah.
direct quote says all men are created equal, the actual principle is more like all people are equal. And at the
Hmm.
end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter if Thomas Jefferson, the man, would agree with me, because I'm right. It doesn't matter if he would think the same way, because he was biased by the society of his day that allowed for slavery, and he himself owned slaves, right? So if the man Thomas Jefferson disagrees with me, it's because of his internal biases and the fact that he's an impure and imperfect human, as am I, but I have the benefit of 250 years of history that he didn't have. So I
That's
can
a
sit
really
here and
good point.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
unequivocally that all people are equal is the
Hmm.
principle we're talking about here. So it doesn't matter that the exact words are all men. It doesn't matter if the man who wrote them, Thomas Jefferson, would agree with me. What matters is that that's the philosophy built underneath it. And you can see it yourself, right? If you look at what they said in or in the Declaration of Independence, if, like, going beyond just that single little quote, they said that all people are created equal and by and endowed with certain unalienable rights. Like, when you look at that concept that we are born with these unalienable rights, how can you then, from the world of natural order and natural rights and nature's God that they mention, how can you argue that all of that applies to only one gender?
Hmm.
Right? Like,
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm glad you challenged that because yes. I think that's a really good point, and I think that that is probably something that I did not initially look at or think about. Another really good reason why people need to read your book. Crack that book open and challenge your ideas, because
thank you.
I had always looked at it as the intent behind the document, but I think I think I was not looking at it in that light or defining it that way. You're right. There's a second layer, there's an underlying layer, and it's that philosophy. It's not necessarily the intent of this human, this regular
Right.
person. Although I will say, what is your opinion then on individuals who they they look at the founding fathers in their own right as like these martyrs, these these gifts from God who founded this country. What's I mean, I have friends who just love, like, Mount Rushmore is probably tattooed on at least one of them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is your opinion of folks who kind of worship the founding fathers rather than the philosophical concepts of what we should be looking at?
My interpretation, I guess, the way you asked the question is, first, their heart is in the right place
Right.
because they're trying to think about something foundational, something fundamental. But you touch on a subject that is sort of mentioned throughout my book. I talk about this in the introduction because in all of the research that I've done over the years that went into this book, I have found that behavior that you're talking about, that reverence for the founding fathers, to be somewhat curious, right? Like, because again, they're just guys. They're just
Mhm.
flawed individuals who had some good ideas. Well, isn't it the ideas that matter the most, not the men themselves? And I give this a term. What we're talking about, this interpretation of how do we treat and feel about the founding fathers, I call it the battle for the founders, because we see that in modern political discourse all the time, is that, oh, well, the founders would agree with me, therefore I'm right.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
as I stated earlier, I gave a very clear example. It actually doesn't matter if the founders would agree with me, because they were flawed individuals, as I might be too, but I have that extra 250 years of history that they theorized a government. I've lived it my entire life. I've lived
Right.
inside of that government, right? Like, so it's a
Yep.
different perspective. That's all
Right.
I'm saying. So when I sit here and say that I can see that the founding principle that they were touching on, with all people are equal, needs to be addressed, rather
Mhm.
than would Thomas Jefferson, the guy who wrote those words, agree with me or not. It doesn't matter. But that's the battle for the founders, is that if people think that it's the, like, definitive gotcha moment in political discourse, is like, if I could prove that the founders would side with me in this argument, then I win.
Yeah.
And I argue, no, you don't,
Yeah.
because they would agree with racists. They would
Yeah.
agree with bigotry. They would agree with sexism.
And I think that's the other side of the coin, right? Is the individuals who hate our founding fathers, who hate what they stood for because they don't agree with the slave ownership. They don't agree with that time period and those men in power. But they also are not looking at the philosophical concept either. Like, yeah, you should not like that. That I don't think that I would agree with Thomas Jefferson if him and I were in a room talking about the intent, like you're saying,
Yeah.
of the documents that were written. But I think that where we would all agree is the point, right? Like, I think the way you phrase it is amazing. With all people are created equal and not necessarily just men. And I think that if it boiled down to brass tacks, that is the underlying concept that which should bring us all together. That should lessen the divide between left, right, up, and down. I think that it's what we get so caught up in the people that we kind of forget that we're all kind of going for the same thing here. So
Right.
no, I really appreciate you saying that because I will say, I love philosophy. I am not familiar with this area of philosophy, so I'm so eager to learn from you specifically, especially with the book because
What area? You mean Enlightenment?
yeah, Enlightenment. I have
You're more
predominantly
familiar with it than you think, because the
and
Enlightenment
yeah,
is called
yeah.
that for a reason. It has enlightened or informed
Mhm.
all of modern philosophy, and certainly is a foundational philosophy behind the United States. So you will find that you
Mhm.
understand it a lot more than you realize as you start
Yeah.
reading into
Yeah.
it.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time kind of in the weeds with Aristotle over the last several years, and I love his like pretty common question. He would ask townspeople like, "Okay, you're rich, you're powerful, but what's the state of your soul?" And that ethics piece behind a lot of Greco-Roman philosophy has always interested me. So I think it'll be interesting to see the overlap with the Enlightenment piece because it's all about being a good person, essentially. So,
Yeah, one of the modern contexts I find related very directly to that is when you so many of today's billionaires are investing massive sums of money in various ways of extending their own life.
right.
Some of them are putting that into like, you know, holistic treatments. Some of them are putting it into medical treatments. Some of them are putting it into like cryogenics. Like, who knows what they're really thinking, but the reality that they believe one of the most important uses of their money is to extend their own life, I believe is exactly back to what Aristotle was talking about, is that only here in this plane on this life does having that much money matter. And it doesn't even really matter that much, but to them it does. So they need to extend their life here so they can continue to enjoy all that, because they know that the state of their eternal soul is not in a good place. So they got to stave off like
Yeah.
experiencing that judgment or whatever they think is going to happen to them as long as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely put me down. I've studied theology and religion for the last 20 years, not because I partake in any particular religion. I honestly don't think I do, but the philosophy behind it, and honestly, it's the commonality between everything that's always interested me. Especially when we look at like Christianity and Islam, who are like hot and cold in a lot of aspects, the way most people view it. But I'm like, there are so many similarities if we just put down the hate for a second, this passed down hereditary hate, and looked at the commonality. I think that we would again find that common undertone. And I always found it so interesting at how divided we are when a lot of what we believe in is pretty similar. It should cause more union than division, in my
Absolutely.
opinion. But getting back to your book, because I'm super fascinated to read, and I wish the post office was open and I would go check my PO box right now. Um, yeah, I'm curious then. So you had to talk a little bit more about your book and kind of we kind of mentioned some of the aspects that are in it, but what
Mhm.
would you say is your thesis?
That's a great question. So I think we've kind of touched on it. So the thesis of the book is to first understand what are the founding principles of this country, and then second, how did we get to where we're at? So it is kind of, on one hand, it's an ambitious view of like, I look at the entirety of American history from the Boston Massacre, which is largely considered by historians to be the first shots fired of the revolution, to today, like all of it. That's a pretty broad brushstroke, I guess, to take from a historical standpoint. At the same time, though, I stay very focused on what I pull out of the American experiment. Like that's why I focus on it. Is like everything that was the founders were doing was conducting this and establishing this experiment in self-governance. So the American experiment, I'm sure you've heard the term. There's this new thing on Netflix with that title, like go for it, check it out. But the American experiment is the thing I'm looking at, and it's this experiment in self-governance. And I dive into it, and I find through that analysis of the founding principles that there are four tenets of the American experiment. And I'll come back to what the four are. That's not a secret. But the idea of the book then is to track those four things through the history of our country. How did those four things work in connection, in tension with each other? How did, when they got out of balance from each other, what happened? We had things like the Civil War. We had things like the stock market crash of 1929. Like, that's what I'm looking at, is those four things and how they evolved and changed and progressed through our history. So what are the four things? The first thing is individual liberty. That's the most obvious one that comes out of the Declaration of Independence, is if everybody's born with these unalienable rights, that is individual liberty. But this takes us down an interesting philosophical path that I'll come back to. So the other three things are popular sovereignty, that we're going to rule by the consent of the governed. Limited government. We're not going to give the government too much power, because that would hinder the first thing, right? Individual liberty.
Mhm.
And then because we recognize that we're a society, that we're not all just a bunch of individuals doing our own thing in our own lane, we're all working together. The fourth thing is economic liberty. But I will say without question and without equivocation that at the very beginning, that economic liberty piece was always meant to apply to individuals, back to the individual liberty part. So no, corporations do not have liberty, and nor should they, because they're not people. They're not human beings. So the economic liberty of individuals is what should be protected. Corporations should be regulated like crazy to ensure that individual economic liberty is never infringed upon. Who's the dog?
That's Legend.
Hi, Legend.
Old man.
Oh, I love that name, too. So in the individual liberty piece, I said I had a thing I was going to come back to. We talk about unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness comes out of the Declaration, and the idea that our government then is permitted to exist by human beings. At no point does our government give us these rights. We have them intrinsically. That's what the Declaration says. That's the philosophy that I think so many people get wrong in today's world, and what we continue to talk about in today's politics. Like, giving the perfect example is this attitude in modern United States right now about immigrants and whether or not they have rights and whatever. Of course they fucking have rights. They're born with those rights. They are unalienable to being human beings. Our government's requirement is to exist in such a way that it never infringes upon anyone's rights. That's what the Declaration of Independence says is the obligation of any government. And when a government fails to do that, what does the Declaration say? It is our right and it is our duty to overthrow such a government. So no government at any point ever should be allowed to infringe upon the rights of the individual. That's the power of the first tenet of the American experiment.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that brings up another point, which is that the document was written without borders. I think a lot of folks, including myself for a long time, were under the assumption that this document exists within the borders for people who were born here. And then, well, that last part I never thought, but that is the consensus right now that I think we're seeing from a lot of folks, especially in our government, is that these are our rights. They're not their rights, and us versus them type of mentality. And I think that we forget that as a society. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are to contributing members of society, right? It's something that was, again, me going back to ancient Greece, your duty as a citizen of the democracy of ancient Greece was to partake, right? If you didn't like the government, if you had something to say, you said it in a way that did exactly that to a certain extent. Do you feel as though that the American populace forget that they have that power or feel powerless? I feel like when I talk to folks, they feel powerless. So like they don't have any say. Well, if I say something, it doesn't make a difference. What is your opinion on that mentality? And do you think that your book kind of reminds them of the power that they have, that we have?
Absolutely. I'm pondering your question because you're presenting your question from a slightly different perspective than I think my book takes. But I do get to a point. It's round about the time of the first Red Scare, right after World War I, where I talk about the way the government started to separate itself from the people. Now, it had done that in pieces prior to this, but at this point in time, the government really started to extract itself from the people. In other words, in my book, I talk about it as this perception of it being an entity separate from the people. And the philosophy of it is that it is just the people. This is our government that is by, of, and for the people, right? It's not an entity separate from us. It does not need nor deserve protection from the people. Because we, the people, are what fucking matters, right? The government needs to adhere to our expectations of it, not the other way around. And that's what the Red Scare changed, is that the government needed the people to behave in an acceptable way and stop speaking out against the government and against the war and so forth. And that really, really started before that, but the first Red Scare really kind of caused it. And I think that's the driving force behind what you're asking, is that when we perceive the government as this entity separate from the people, then we see
Yep.
it as this wicked, powerful entity. And then we question, does my vote have any impact on that big, powerful entity? Well, it's not an entity separate. It is not. Nor should
Yeah.
it be treated like it is. Nor should it be protected like it is from
Yeah.
us, you know?
I just retired from government service. I retired early. And one of the reasons, so in my debrief, they were asking, like, you had such this amazing career, you climbed the corporate ladder so well, like, you're at the upper echelons of the government. Why are you leaving? And my only response is, we've all forgotten who we serve. I'm not here to serve you or somebody who sits
Okay.
behind a desk. I serve the American public, and my job is to protect people, information, and infrastructure. That person in the building that I'm protecting could be an American citizen, could be going there to apply for American citizenship, could be there to file their taxes. I don't care. My job is to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
And we got so far away from that. I work for Homeland Security. We got
Mm-hmm.
so far away from that, in my opinion, over the last 5 or 6 years of service, that I was like, we are forgetting what we're here to do. I don't serve you. So I retired early. I retired
I love
at
that.
20. And I would say that is something that I have always felt, but I relate. I relate to people who feel like I had this conversation like less than a week ago with somebody who was having a problem, and the local elected official was not, listening to not just her, but a lot of other individuals that were having that problem. I'm like, exercise your rights, right? They are an elected official. We put them in that position. We can
Mm-hmm.
also remove them from that position. You can, voice. I'm a big fan of attending protests. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's phenomenal that people do that. I don't even care what they're protesting, right? Exercising your rights. I think it's great, whether I believe with the message or not.
Mm-hmm.
But she said something to me that I've heard before, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit. And she was like, "What does it matter?" She's like, I'm just a single mom. Like, what does it matter? And I'm like, dude, it matters. Like, it matters.
So
Regardless of
much.
your stanchion, you don't have to be this powerful person. You don't have to know somebody. Like, I don't know. I can't help but feel absolutely terrible for people who feel powerless. It's a terrible feeling, especially now with this administration. I think, like
Yeah.
you're saying, that separation seems so much more obvious, in terms of what we think, what we're perceiving, and what actually is.
Yes. One thing you said in there reminds me, there's this brilliant quote from a movie in the 90s called The American President. It was a Rob Reiner film who recently passed away, but in that movie, the president, played by Michael Douglas, I think, he's talking about protest a little bit. And he says almost what you just said, right? Supporting the right to protest, even when it's somebody protesting a thing that I'm for, right? Like, and I think the quote goes something like, to celebrate the United States or something, you have to celebrate a person's right to stand center stage and advocate for, at the top of their lungs, that which you would spend a lifetime opposing at the top of yours.
Yeah.
But that right to do that political discourse, that debate, that protest, that's what should never be questioned.
Yeah.
We can disagree all day long, but
Yeah.
we can't disagree on the right to have the disagreement. And I
Yeah.
think our political climate right now is very much the opposite, right? That the disagreement's not even allowed. We're not going to entertain the disagreement. I mean, we have an administration that's talking about um, the ways that they can get rid of anybody who disagrees with them politically, how to
Yeah.
weaponize against their political rivals, and anyway, so forth. Like, it does lead to valid questions that, like, the single mother person you're talking about asking, like, what does it matter? And if there does come a time where going to these protests could result in being arrested, which isn't new, right? If you've
Right.
studied the civil rights era, how many people doing these sit-ins at the lunch counters in the schools and the other places like got arrested for their actions, right? And that what were they doing? They were peacefully protesting. Okay, so what's the real action, I guess, or so what of it all?
Yeah, I think I would love to see folks feel more empowered, to remind them, to make them feel a little less helpless. That's kind of what my mission has always been. I write. I am in no way would consider myself a writer, but a lot of what I write about are I just challenge ideas. I try to find that commonality in both opposing views, just to get people to think a little bit more about where the other person is coming from. I was in the car the other day with a friend of mine, and there was a pro-Trump rally at the corner of very popular street, or a busy street in my town. And do I agree with the message? No, not necessarily. But they were able to protest, and I think that that's great. I think it's ironic that they don't like when other people protest, but
Yeah, exactly.
the individual that was in the car with me, my friend, she was really upset that they were protesting. I'm like, you don't have to agree with the message. The whole point is that they should have the ability to protest, and so should you. And the next day, there was the complete opposite protest that was there, and I'm like, that's the beauty of our country. Is that? But you're both protesting what you believe in the same exact spot. I'm like, and we're not thinking that irony is, or coincidence is, hysterical. Like, I think that's great. But, you know,
There's an important topic here that I want to come back to, but you said something a second ago that I can't let it go.
yeah.
You said you write a lot, but you don't consider yourself a writer.
Yeah.
What's the barrier? Why aren't you a writer in your own mind?
You know, I don't know. And it's not that I don't enjoy it. I do enjoy it. I don't know why I don't consider myself a writer. Maybe it's because it's not a profession that I pursue, but
I mean, I play basketball, but I'm not a professional basketball player, but I go out and shoot hoops sometimes, right? But I
yeah.
can still say I'm a basketball player,
I mean, yeah, you
right?
can. I don't.
But I mean, I would
Yeah.
never claim to be a professional basketball player. I've never been
Yeah.
paid to play basketball, but
Yeah.
writing's the same thing. You write and you share your thoughts. Like you're a writer. Give
Yeah.
yourself
I
the credit
guess.
you deserve. Maybe you're not a professional writer if you've never published a book and gotten paid, but you're
Yeah.
still a writer.
Yeah. I think. I think eventually I'll accept that as part of my identity, but it's been a while. I
Good.
have 4 published books and a
Then how are you
magazine,
not
but
a writer?
but to this day I don't feel like I'm a writer. I feel like I write because I just kind of like I think one of the
So
things that I relate
I
to.
mean, just
Yeah.
stop right there. Like you have to call yourself a writer because you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're not going to be a writer until what you win a Pulitzer Prize, you're not a writer until you get
Yeah.
a Nobel Prize in literature. Like, what are you looking for here? What is the barrier? What does it take to be a writer that you're not? Like, and I don't think there's going to be a valid answer to that question. You're
No.
not convincing
It's
me yet. So
definitely rhetorical. And it's just something that I either have to accept or draw that line in the sand and say, okay, once I pass this, that I'm a writer. I haven't identified that yet or established
then
what
you're a
that
writer.
is. Yeah.
Until you draw
Yeah.
that line, you have to call yourself a writer because there is
Yeah.
no line.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put a
You're a
little
published author. Like,
yeah.
what's the difference? You're a writer.
I don't
Come on.
I don't know. What's funny is I was working on I just transitioned W3 magazine to Substack. And we were on our own platform, but I wanted the platform didn't allow me to give folks access for free, and I wanted most of the items that we wrote to be free. So I transitioned to Substack, much better platform, and I was working on my bio with somebody that I hired to help me with branding, and she put published author, and I was like, gross, take that out of there. I was like,
Why?
she was like, but the Amazon link in your profile goes to your writer page on Amazon, where my book is sold, and then Barnes and Noble and all the other places. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the resistance is, the internal crisis. I will figure that out eventually. But that
I think
honestly though,
viewers are going to get the benefit here of a little bit of
yeah,
therapy for you. Like I want you
yeah,
to think that your
Dr. Virga
therapist
therapy
is going to ask you,
session. Yeah.
yeah, like what would happen if you allowed yourself to call yourself a writer now? What's the worst thing that would happen?
I don't know. I think the more that I think about it, the more I think I write because I want to, and I think if I call myself a writer, I'd have to write because I have to.
Okay,
That
there's
that
something
might be a
valid
little,
there.
might
There's
be a little
something
piece
it
to
would
it.
it would steal the joy from it
Yeah, yeah,
if it's now an
yeah,
obligation and not a joy.
yeah, yeah. You can
Okay,
bill me for the 15 minutes for this session. We've come to the
no.
conclusion. Yeah, yeah.
No,
Maybe it's a little bit of that. Yeah,
so you have to give yourself permission to still only write because you
yeah,
want to, not because
yeah,
you're obligated to, but you
yeah,
are a writer. And what writer in the history of published authors or writers would disagree with that? That you do it because
probably.
do it when you're ready and when you love to. And when you do it
Yeah,
because you're obligated to, guess what? The stuff you write's probably not your best work.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I also found that when I tried to give myself a schedule, I'm going to publish one work a week, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to sit down and actually write anything. But when I removed that requirement and I changed like the W3 magazine to published whenever, I found it much more enjoyable, and I actually was able to pump out more meaningful pieces. But and I don't writing a book is takes a ton of work. But one of the things that I relate to that you had said is that when you came to the conclusion, like, I need to write this stuff down, right after the election, I kind of felt that same, I don't want to call it a calling, but
Mm,
essentially that same like feeling,
yeah.
that same desire to write stuff down. Because I was posting a lot of long form statuses on Facebook, and I found that that middle line was appreciated and challenged, rightfully so, by a majority of my followers. And I was like wondering if I unpacked this idea a little further, aside from the limited space that Facebook gives me, and created a little bit of a longer form, would it still be digestible and easy to consume for folks that were reading it? But also try, my goal was to try and bring people together by challenging their ideas. And I mean, I had folks agreeing in the comments that I know for sure are on both sides of the political spectrum. And I have a funny feeling that your book is going to do the same based on what we talked about, and I love that common ground. I love when folks are like, this is good, this is correct, this is how I feel, and so does the other guy, the guy protesting on the odd on the odd weekends when you're protesting on the even. It's like, yeah, that guy that you hate to see holding up the sign that you don't like has the
Yeah.
same agreement with the philosophy of the foundation of this country. So, you mentioned a
Essentially.
second book. I'm
Oh,
curious,
yeah.
what are your ideas for that? What are you leaning towards? I know it's like a terrible thing to ask somebody, but
Oh, no. I love talking about my second book at this point because it's helping me formulate the needed basis for writing the second book. But I have a couple of things I need to say, and then I'll answer the question about the second book. The first thing was I've had a couple of reviews come back from the trades, the Kirkus reviews and Book Life and stuff like that, the like professional reviews. One of them called me not nonpartisan, anti-partisan is what they termed me, because I am adamantly opposed to the two-party system. It's
oh,
neither permitted nor defined in the Constitution. Therefore, the
nice.
parties should have no official power in government whatsoever.
Hmm.
Um, and that shows up in a lot of ways, right? Like there should be no rule allowed in Congress, in the Congress of the United States, that draws lines on party lines. Right? And we have rules right now, like, well, you have to have this many signatures from the opposing party before we can, review this piece of legislation or whatever. And they have rules like the party whip as a position. The party whip goes around and makes sure everybody in their party votes the same way. This should be fucking outlawed.
Yeah.
We don't vote on party line, motherfucker. We vote based on our constituency. We vote our conscience. That's how we're supposed to vote in Congress. Like, that's not acceptable to have a party whip. So I'm very anti-partisan. The second thing, though, both of the professional reviewers used the word polemic to define my book. I had to look it up. I consider myself to be a person of fairly large vocabulary. I had no idea what that word meant. I had to go look it up.
Yeah, break down the etymology. What does the word mean for anybody who doesn't know?
It basically a polemic. They're describing my book as one that takes a very strong position and does not leave a whole lot of space for an opposing position. And it's because of the philosophy, right? What you and I have talked about at this point is that there's not an acceptable alternative to democracy, right?
Right.
And any American who runs around saying, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, you're a fucking idiot. Go learn your goddamn history and understand that a republic is a form of democracy.
Yeah.
Democracy is the umbrella. Republic is the handle, right? Like, so we are a democratic republic. All that means is that we directly elect our representatives, right? Like the Roman Republic had their representatives chosen by birthright and other methods. It wasn't election. We elect all of our representatives, so it's a democratic republic. Coming back to this idea of it being definitive, I guess, I think that there are, like you said, there will be people who read what I've written here and be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. And that might come from any side of the political spectrum. But there are some later chapters in here where I make it abundantly clear that if you reside today on a certain side of the political spectrum, you're a treasonous traitor to the United States. If you proudly put on that red hat and call yourself MAGA, you do not reside within the spectrum that is acceptable by the founding principles of the United States. I'll say that with definitiveness, and I'll say that proudly. So anybody who calls themselves MAGA is guilty of treason against this country.
And I hope everyone listening to this episode who is mad at that picks up the book and then responds. I do have a large conservative following, and that's mostly because of the type of content, and making them slightly angry is my favorite. And vice versa. I love challenging ideas, and I will play devil's advocate for either side. But I love that, and I think that.
Well, and let's be clear, for the sake of people listening that are interested in this conversation, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being conservative, right? There's always been a valid debate in this country between conservative. The reason that word is used is to say conservative size of the federal government. We want the federal government to be small. And the third of the four tenets of the American experiment that I listed off earlier is limited government.
Right.
That is one of the tenets of our experiment. We want the government to be limited in its power, and therefore it needs to be limited in size, limited in its budget, limited in very many ways.
Yeah, limited in scope.
Yeah. So being conservative means that you are maybe focused on that tenet of the American experiment. How do we limit the government and its power? There's nothing wrong with that debate. And we use the term liberal because people are wanting to give the federal government a little bit more liberal approach to its power, so that it can better protect the individual liberties of the American citizenry. That's ultimately the goal, is how do we achieve freedom for American citizens? How do we achieve a government that facilitates and acknowledges, enables maybe, the free exercise of our individual liberties? That's what we're trying to achieve. Liberals say, well, we need to give the government a little bit more power so that it can do the things that will be necessary to protect our individual liberties. And conservatives say, no, we need to stop the government from having too much power so that it doesn't infringe upon our individual liberties. Okay, this has always been a valid debate from the very beginning. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had those debates directly in cabinet rooms with George Washington sitting at the head of the table. Like, that conversation has been around since the beginning. What I said a second ago about MAGA is a different statement. MAGA is not conservative. MAGA is so far off the political spectrum to the right that nothing they stand for fits within the founding principles of the United States.
I would agree with that. I think the more I have learned, lessons learned, especially from inside of the government, the more I'm like, what the heck is happening? I mean, there were some things that I experienced where I'm like, are we okay with this? Like, is this a real thing that's happening? And everyone was literally terrified to say something amongst government employees. Were terrified to stand up and say something because of the powers that be. And I think that, again, going back to that powerless feeling, because we have a group of individuals that are idolizing, our current president, and it's giving a little too much. I want to say false power, but it's an exercisable power that clearly he's been dipping into, and I that's why I didn't like that either. Um, that's also another concept that I'd love to pick your brain about, is that yes, the institution, the government itself, is supposed to be this branch of the people, and it has become separated, but how do we reel it back in, right? Like, how do we
Yeah.
remind them of their place?
You're setting up the conversation so perfect, because the answer to that question is the same as the answer to your question about my second book.
Ooh,
So
I'm
the second
intrigued.
book coming
Yeah.
out the title of the second book is The 5-Amendment Solution. So in this book, I will be, it's sort of a sequel in the sense that this is the full history of the United States with that viewpoint on the 4 tenets of the American experiment that I talked about. It basically gives this polemic of an idea of how we got to
Yes.
where we're at. And then if this is true, if everything I've said is what I said, and this is where we're at, well, then what do we do about it? That's the obvious question that I think people will walk away from this book with is, okay, so what do we do? If all of this is true and the conclusions that I come to in my book are accurate, what do we do? And the answer is 5 amendments that I will propose fully. Like, I will provide the exact text of the amendment the way I believe it should appear in the Constitution. I will give explanations as to why every single clause in every single one of those amendments is necessary. But I think we should start at the basic idea of amendments, right? Like, we haven't passed very many amendments in this country. When you think about the fact that they wrote these 7 articles of the original Constitution, and it says right there in Article 5, like, here's how to add things to this, here's how to change it. And oh, by the way, we're going to demonstrate that to you because we want it to be very clear to the American people that this is an important power of the Constitution. So we're going to go right ahead. The very first Congress of the United States says, here's 10. Actually, they said, here's 12. Here's 12 amendments we think we should immediately add into the Constitution. And the body politic of the United States said, well, we're going to accept these 10 of them because those 10 focus on our rights. That's why it was called the Bill of Rights, right? But there were 2 other amendments on that bill that they proposed that never got, well, one of them got ratified in 1992. That's a strange story. The other one never got ratified. But the point is, we did that 10 times in the first few years of the Constitution having been ratified. And then we've done it a total of 16 times since. And I would subtract out a whole bunch of those, right? Like, I would subtract anything that's just like like a structural adjustment to the Constitution, does it really count? Like, it's not expanding the rights of the people. It's just like updating the calendar. You know, the 25th
Right.
Amendment does that. And like, you know, the 12th Amendment just kind of fixed something that had nearly gone terribly wrong in the election of 1800. And like, you know, we fixed some things. Get rid of those amendments. Oh, and by the way, there's that one amendment that then got repealed by another amendment. So those two just kind of cancel each other out. So what are we down to here? We're down to like, I don't know, 8
Yeah.
amendments
8 or
over
9, yeah.
250 years. Well, it's not that long actually, but you know, since like
Yeah.
1790, 1791, whatever, like we've had that many amendments to the Constitution. And the founders would be sitting here flabbergasted. They'd be like, we expected you guys, like, we
Yeah.
kind of figured like every generation would probably have some things they wanted to make sure they got worked in there. Like,
Yeah.
so that's my point, is that I'm coming at it from this perspective of like adding amendments to the Constitution should be a regular thing. Like, we should have no hesitation about adding something to the Constitution, because I think it goes back to that original conversation we had about intention. If all we ever care about in the world of constitutional law, this is called originalism, if all we care about is the original intent of the Constitution, and we don't want to change it, we just want to hold it steady and keep it, you know, protected, and keep what was actually intended and how it was originally built and interpreted only based on what the original intent is. That's all legal originalism is how that's handled.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So originalists are like, well, they didn't, when they wrote the Second Amendment, they expected all citizens to be able to carry guns. So originalism is not applied to the Second Amendment. I guess I misspoke. So what I mean is that the original intent of the Second Amendment was to protect the militias. So if you're not a member of the militia, the Second Amendment does not apply to you under originalism. If you interpret only based on original intent, they wrote it very specifically. That's what the words say: in order to maintain a well-ordered militia, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So if you're not a member of the militia, you don't have the Second Amendment. It doesn't apply to you. But we don't want originalism, because it forces interpretations like that. So again, coming back to the idea that intent and originalism, if we're trying to protect the Constitution and keep it minimal and keep it only what it was originally, that doesn't make any sense. Why did they write the 5th article of the original Constitution if that's how it was supposed to be done? So we should be adding amendments to the Constitution on a regular basis, right? Like every time new technologies come up, there should have been amendments dealing with the internet, dealing with AI, dealing with things over the years, you know, as the country has progressed. Why are we not adding more amendments to the Constitution? So that's my first argument. And then, like I said, in this second book, I'm going to propose 5 specific amendments that come back to what you said about how do we re-empower the people? How do we give the people something back to believe in, to realize that they have the power and that the government works for us? Right? That's what I'm going to propose, and what I think would solve it is going to require 5 amendments. So think of it like, after the Civil War, we had 3 amendments we called Reconstruction, or the Reconstruction era amendments. I think we've reached a point in American history where we need a complete reconstruction of the American body politic in order to restore those true original founding principles of the country.
Yeah, I think it's important also to make that distinction. I think that what you just said is the true distinction between I guess I would say between intent and where, you know, what it should be. I don't know, that I feel like that document has such a stronghold on everybody in the country on both sides. And even now, hearing you say that, and I mean, I know that, but at the same time, when you hear someone like yourself say it out loud, it's like the malleability there, right? It's not this rigid document that we have to follow to the T as it's written, the intent that it was set out for. We have the ability to update it. And people complain all the time, oh, that doesn't apply now. It just, you know, it doesn't fit our current society. And it's like, well, there's a solution to that. It's in that same document that tells you to amend it literally. Um,
Exactly.
so that's yeah, honestly, that's something that I just don't normally think about, and it's we're all out here complaining about this thing, and it's like, well, there's a built-in solution.
Yeah.
So
Fix it.
yeah, that's I'm excited for your second book too, because that again, it's things you don't think about. You complain about the institution, and I'm a big fan of, if you don't like something or if you're going to complain about something, at least also have an idea of what the solution should be, right? At least that's my own internal philosophy. Is like, I just don't want to bitch
That's the
about stuff.
Navy talking right
Yeah.
there for sure.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's like,
Yeah.
you have this problem, don't just bitch about it. Like, give me a solution, or an idea, even if it's bizarre or completely unattainable. At least it's a starting point, right? We know we can't do that. Maybe that's the extreme of solutions. What else
Okay.
is there? Yeah.
Let's
But
let's look to those founders, those guys, those humans that we've been talking about for a little bit of an example on what you're talking about, what you just
Mhm.
said. The Declaration of Independence, what is that? That's a statement of the problem, right? I mean, aside from the philosophy, which we've already discussed here, what is the main meat of the Declaration of Independence? It's that list of grievances, right?
Yep.
Okay, so this is 27 grievances that they listed off there of like bullshit that the Crown of England had perpetrated against the American colonies that were bad enough things to put them on a list and say, look, we just can't be part of your government anymore. So this is the problem. Here's the 27 things that have created the problem. But the Declaration of Independence does not define what's to come. It doesn't provide the solution. Right? What you're saying is it's important to recognize the problem first. And I think that the Navy mentality is like goes a little overboard in all of us, that we're like, don't bring me the problem until you know what the solution is. That's just because I want to avoid having to do any thinking myself. And that's usually a good idea, to keep
Yeah.
thinking out of the hands of anybody with a butter bar, or, even up to the railroad tracks rank of lieutenant. Like, it's dangerous to let those guys do any thinking. So like, don't bring them too many problems that you haven't already thought out the solution to.
Yeah.
Um, I joke. I'm only making fun of Navy
It's
junior
okay.
officers, but the point is that like, you have to recognize the problem, and
Right.
sometimes it requires something definitive, like the Declaration of Independence, to write down. We have a big problem. This is a big, big problem. Requires some really intelligent solutioning. Let's get to work on that, but we're going to state the problem first,
Mhm.
without any solution built in. And
Yeah.
that's what the Declaration of Independence was, just the statement of the problem. Later came the Constitution. But most people, I think, get this little piece of American history wrong, especially this year as we've been celebrating 250, right? That's 250 years from that signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was more than 10 years later that we finally got the Constitution. And I
Would
feel
you
like, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, would you say that the solution that was essentially presented to those grievances was, we're going to do our own thing? Wouldn't you say that in itself was the start of the solution, but the granular details came with the Constitution?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that the solution is implied. We're going to do our own
Right.
thing here.
But
But
how they do that.
but
Yeah.
we could very well have just established our own monarchy. That would have been a solution, wouldn't have
Correct.
really
Yeah.
addressed any of the problems listed in the Declaration of Independence, but it would have been a solution. We could have just been like,
Right.
hey, GW, you're king now. And actually, there were plenty of people, like, there were a number of politicians in the United States who literally wanted exactly that. They wanted to crown George Washington the American king.
Hmm.
And had he been a different and maybe more ambitious sort of person, like, he might have done it, but he was, for all his faults, he had some wisdom about him, and he refused the idea of wearing a crown. But there were literally people talking about, how do we crown George Washington because he's a great guy. Let's just have our own monarchy and be done with it. And that was a proposed solution. But I think that comes back to what you're saying is that, like, yes, we're going to do our own thing is the implied solution, but that's not nearly detailed enough to, like,
right.
you
Actually
know,
solve
like
those
that's like
grievances,
saying,
yeah.
that's like being in the Navy and going to the chief and saying, hey, chief, this piece of machinery is broken. The solution is let's fix it.
Let's fix it, yeah. Yeah. Although
Great
that's what the
idea. Let's
that's
do
what
it.
the chief wants. The wants is like, okay, let me know when it's done. But in reality, it's like, well, shit, how are we going to fix it? Yeah.
How do you fix it? Do you just turn it off and back on again? That would be
Yeah.
more like, that would be how Air Force people probably solve most of their problems. But, you know, like, how do you, how do you actually fix it is still the question. And that's the same thing here, is that the Constitution needed over 10 years to, like, percolate and mature the ideas within it, you know, and don't think that for 10 years, the people who were part of our government were just sitting around twiddling their thumbs and then finally decided, oh, okay, let's do something about it. No, they spent that 10 years reading and studying and debating and attempting various things through under the Articles of Confederation. That was the government established immediately upon our independence. But the Articles of Confederation and the were inherently weak, and they knew that. But they were spending those years under the Confederation to, like, debate and design and come up with something better. And when they felt that they were kind of prepared to do that, that's when they proposed to the states, like, hey, let's have a constitutional convention and get this thing ironed out and actually create a government that's going to work for everybody here. But they were working that whole 10 years on trying to do this, you know?
Yeah.
So it took a long time to get from here's the problem to what's the solution. And oh, by the way, when they proposed the solution, they were like, hey, we also realized that our solution here is probably incomplete. So here's Article 5, and you can now make changes to the solution to make it even better.
Would you say your books are kind of set up that way, minus the 10-year gap, in identifying the list of problems and the historical context of those problems, while also providing a solution in what we'll call Volume 2?
Volume 2. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a very astute way to put it. Like, you know, one of the things I talk about in here, it comes back to what you were saying about, you know, watching people do protests for various ends of the political spectrum and stuff like that. I think one of the challenges, though, that has reared its head in the modern United States, and arguments can be made for at least 100 years back, if not further, but we have this thing called the paradox of tolerance happening real time and live in our country. So the paradox of tolerance is this: if your society is built to be a tolerant one, and one of the things it starts to tolerate is people who are very intolerant, then your society, so a tolerant society has to create space for these varying opinions, right? That's kind of the idea of being tolerant. And if we create space for intolerance, how quickly does that space grow to the point that we become an intolerant society? So that's the paradox. You can't have tolerance without naturally becoming intolerant at some point. So the one thing that a tolerant society must be intolerant of is intolerance.
And, like, therefore not tolerant. Hence the paradox. But
no, but I don't think, I mean, you're right. That's the paradox in a nutshell. But I don't think that there's actually a contradiction there when you come down to it. Because if we sit here and say, as a tolerant society, we're going to allow for all religions, okay? Freedom of church and state, you know, First Amendment right, which doesn't actually say the words freedom or separation of church and state, but it says, you know, the government can't establish one true religion of the government. Okay, but then let's say somebody comes along with a religion and says, my religion is that all other religions are blasphemous and must be destroyed. And we're going to let that religion exist equally alongside all these other religions. And then it goes out and does hate crimes. But then those hate crimes that it claims are protected religious activity.
I see what you're saying.
Like, we can't actually have that. No. So the whole point of tolerance is that you're allowed to believe what you believe, so long as what you
Doesn't, yeah,
do does not infringe upon anybody else's right to do the
right,
same. That's why we say murder is wrong in our country, not because it's one of the commandments, right? It's not from religious doctrine. It's because murder is you taking away someone else's right to life, right? Life,
right,
liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? You know, everyone has the right to life. So we can't take that away from somebody else. Like, you might believe in your belief system that the death penalty is acceptable because of this crime and so on. Like, it becomes convoluted and complicated, but you see the point, right? Like, we can't allow for belief systems that then violate other people's rights. That's the thing we can't do, but we have done in this country. We now
right.
have these massive groups of people in politics even who are attempting to institute their bigotry, their
Yeah,
intolerance as policy.
yeah. As you're saying that, it reminded me of this passage in Kite Runner where I forget the protagonist's name, but his father is telling him that the greatest sin is theft, and he's like, I don't what like what do you mean the greatest sin is theft? He's like, if you take a man's life, you steal his right to live. If you take a man's money, you steal his right to to pay for things, and the list goes on. So it was like an interesting concept of by not giving someone the ability to do what you can also do because you took something from them, that you removed that enablement, that in itself is like the greatest crime against humanity, was essentially the point of
Remember that
that.
now? Yeah.
Yeah. I did have a question. I wrote a piece recently called essentially it was Christianity will never be the religion of the United States. It was based off of a little bit of a disagreement I had on social media with a friend of mine who has, kind of had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment, is now a Christian, good for him and his family. But I feel like he's weaponizing a little bit. And I expected more from my Air Force veteran. But I told him, I was like, he presented this idea that Christianity is the religion of the United States. It will always be. It's what our it's what our Constitution is based on, was his argument, was Christianity. And again, I'm not nowhere near as well versed in the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution as you are, obviously, but I was like, I feel like that is the complete opposite of what of what those documents say. And the word I used was
Take
intent,
this to
but
him. I mean,
yeah.
he'll hate you for it, but take this to him. 1797 saw the ratification of the Treaty of Tripoli. The treaty was negotiated under George Washington's administration, and then it was unanimously ratified by the Senate and then signed into law under President John Adams. And many of those people who wrote and drafted and ratified, obviously were among the group who would be considered the founding fathers. Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli says that the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion and has no enmity against Muslims.
Hmm.
Not
Yeah.
in any sense
Yeah.
founded on the Christian religion.
Yeah. Again, my analytical brain. So I wrote this very brief article, but it was based on a Pew Research study that went out and surveyed a very large number of Americans. I would say that the total, when I looked at the raw data, I don't think it's a good representation of everyone across the United States in terms of like age and demographic, but I think it was a decent number of people looking at just straight end value, and it looked into that. What what do Americans believe, and would they like to see Christianity as the religion of the United States? And um, it is trending upward, but it's still a resounding no, right? The percentage might be slightly higher, but it's still a resounding no. But
Okay,
the research
let's
was
let's dive
interesting.
into this some
Yeah.
details here. Okay, so first of all, I think I think the founders said it perfectly clear that it's in the Declaration of Independence, right? Governments are the province of men, like humans, right? I don't mean that sexist. I meant that like in the colloquial sense of the word, right? It's not the province of males. It's the province of human beings is what I meant. And it says this in the Declaration of Independence, like the governments are just instituted amongst humans to secure their rights. And I don't think God wants anything to do with government. God wants a direct relationship, especially the Christian God. But I think an argument could be made for the God of Islam, the God of Judaism, like, and probably many other religions as well, that those deity beliefs, they want a personal relationship with the faithful, right? They want that direct relationship. They don't need power in government, right? They just let the humans kind of govern themselves through the consent of the governed. That makes sense. And then a direct relationship that I can have. And that's only achievable if you have something like the religion clause of the First Amendment under a government that recognizes itself to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. So I think religion is best facilitated for that personal relationship with God, like only if religion is not established by the government can I feel assured that my relationship with my God is real. It's not mandated by my government. It's not forced upon me by policy. It's something I chose, and it's something I explore personally through my own spirituality and my own religious beliefs. So that's exactly what the Declaration of Independence tells us we're supposed to have in the context of religion and government in the United States, at least. I think beyond that, if we want to have a conversation around Judeo-Christian values, because absolutely many of the founding fathers were Christians, some of them deeply religious, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And so, of course, the Judeo-Christian values informed their decision-making process and informed their contributions to the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, the Constitutional Convention, and so on. Like, of course, their religious values came into play. How would that translate into the modern United States? Well, honestly, my personal view on it is there's no question about the separation of church and state in my mind. That's not even a debate. However, if Christians were running around in the United States today arguing that the Beatitudes of Jesus Christ needed to be taught in schools, needed to be on these tablets that were hung on the wall in classrooms, I'd argue it a little less vehemently than I do about the Ten Commandments. Because what are the Beatitudes teaching us? Like picture this. What if every courtroom in the United States had "Blessed are the merciful" plastered on the wall behind the judge? What country would that be? Right?
Yeah.
I have less of a problem of a Christian coming along, let's teach the Beatitudes, versus the commandments, right? The commandments are just about control. And the commandments are not unique to Christianity. They're contained in the Old Testament, right? Like, so if you want something that is unique to Christianity and you want something that is going to teach our society to be better, why are you not arguing for the Beatitudes being taught in school? Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, right? Like, these lessons are something that, like, people who are opposed to Christian nationalism and people who are opposed to religion in schools are going to be less bothered, right? Like, you want to teach my kid to be merciful through your religion? I mean, as long as it's clear that it's religious text, I'll allow it, right? Like, that's kind of how I feel about it. But you want to force the Ten Commandments upon people, like, it's a different conversation. And that's where I think it comes in, is that, like, at no point should we ever have an established religion of the country, because then you just destroy everyone's ability to have their own relationship with God. We don't want to do that. We just want to govern ourselves, manage life on earth, and let people have relationship with their God in whatever manner they think is best, as long as they don't take away anybody else's right to do the same. But if you want to make sure that certain belief systems are better understood, like, why is the focus on something like the commandments instead of the Beatitudes? That's my question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I just finished reading the Bible cover to cover. I read it in order this time.
Ouch.
It took me 16 months, a very long time because
Yeah.
I tried to do my due diligence. I also looked at the various critical texts and the different translations, and this way I was able to cross-reference things that I thought were either meaningful or ambiguous with the the various other versions of the Bible and translations.
What translation was it that you did the cover to cover reading?
So that I did was the NIV, the
Okay.
study Bible that I had, but I cross-referenced it with the King James version because I think that's my favorite version of the Bible or translation of the Bible. I
Yeah,
find it
most people
incredible.
like it because it's poetic. Yeah.
I was just about to say that it's incredibly poetic, and there are some lines that I found in the NIV that were, um, common vernacular. I was like, I wonder how this was actually written because if it's this impactful to me reading it in this turn of
Actually written?
phrase, or okay, let me back up. Actually written
You
is
read
entirely
Aramaic?
different.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's something I also found it really interesting. I have the systemic theology books. So it kind of goes a little bit deeper into the themes. And that's the first time I've actually ever read the Bible with a theology book. And I think that each revision of the Bible has an interesting layer of subjectiveness to it. So I also got a study Bible that has the like historical references and like artifacts that have been found and archaeological references. I find the Bible to be a beautiful book, but I think the same about the Quran and I think the same about the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas. I think they're all beautifully written, and I think that, like, to your point, there are so many amazing lessons that can be taken from it to help you lead a happier, healthier life, right? And I mean healthier in terms of like emotional and spiritual health. But I do also find certain aspects of all of those religious texts to be pretty harsh, especially when you're looking at the Torah. um,
I would
I
hope that, because I do agree with you about
yeah,
those books all having great value, the Quran, the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, but I would hope that you put books like The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau into the
I
same category, because
yeah,
that's like, I mean, um what was the other one I was looking for? The Spirit of the Laws. That was Montesquieu. I mean, at least those should be covered under the same reverence, because I
Spirit
think
of the
those
Laws. I have not read that. That would be a
those
good one
these
to
are
read.
foundational to Enlightenment philosophy. So just bringing things
Oh,
full
okay.
circle to that is like, if we're
Yeah,
going to talk about these philosophical religious texts or theological texts that are, the subtext is all philosophical, right? How do you live
right.
your life? How should you live your life? Why should you live your life this way? Like, we have to include, like, in the modern United States, I don't think you can have conversations like that and ignore Enlightenment,
Yeah,
because so much of our foundation, our structure, our history is sourced in that, equally as much as anything biblical, right? Like I
yeah,
said, I quoted the Treaty of Tripoli about it's not founded in any sense on the Christian religion, but again, many of these men were deeply religious Christian believers. So the philosophy they brought in was informed and influenced by their Christian faith. But so did all of that Enlightenment thinking. Like, so
yeah,
if you really want to, I mean, I know you were mentioning things from like a broader sense of religious studies and theological beliefs, but I am tying it back to that kind of basic concept of what we're talking about with the founding of the United States and what are those founding principles. And yes, I think it is absolutely valid to include Christian theological study, because those things did inform the founding of the United States, but more so even than that would be the Enlightenment philosophy. So you have to put those books in the same
yeah,
category as the Bible if you're going to if your goal is to study the influencing powers of the United States and its founding,
yeah.
you have to include those things.
No, that's a good point, and I haven't, and I definitely want to look into that. But I honestly would argue that we should remove the Christian piece from the title, because I found that a lot of those basic principles are the commonality amongst a lot of the religious texts that I've read. Being a
Sure.
good person was kind of like the string that kept them all together. And what normally annoys a lot of my friends is I say that the Torah is book one, the New Testament is book two, and the Quran is book three. And they hate that, right? Because you know, the Quran recognizes Jesus Christ, but says that Muhammad is the most current Messiah. You know, Jesus might have been first, but the
I
newest.
think that's slightly off from a theological perspective. I think
Yeah,
Muhammad is seen as a prophet, much like Abraham, or
yeah,
so. So Muslim is more like Judaism, the sequel, right? It's
yeah,
it's the same as Judaism, except it has
yeah,
additional books and additional prophets. But at
yeah,
no point do they. I don't believe their viewpoint on Muhammad is messianic. I think it's
yeah.
prophetic.
I think, I believe that that's correct to say. I don't think that any one particular religion denies the existence of Jesus Christ. They just argue his importance and what he represents and who he actually was to the people. So when we look at the founding principles, and again, speaking as a novice who hasn't really read anything else about Enlightenment philosophy, I would argue that I wouldn't even call it a Christian value. I just call it a people value. You know what I mean? Like being a good person, being not kind to your neighbor, you know, all of those things. I mean, I feel like that is the commonality amongst most belief systems.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't find it to be a problem, like you're saying. I'm agreeing with you to teach those things in schools, because at the end of the day, you could put any religion there. You can call it the Christian value system. You can call it the Buddhist value system. It's it's kind of the same when you distill it down and how it's applied to the like modern United States, if we were to
Yeah.
do that. But
And I think if
yeah.
you could have a conversation with Jesus Christ, and he did, let's say you could have a conversation with the Jesus Christ that Christianity tends to believe in.
Mhm.
So he is this messianic character, or person, right? If you could talk to that person and ask him about Christian nationalism, he'd be like, "Oh, no, don't,
Yeah.
please don't put my name on that stuff. Just like let people handle the government thing, and
Yeah.
just let me have that personal relationship." And then and he might ask questions. I feel he would ask intelligent questions about like what that government is doing, though. Like, okay, what amendment do you have that ensures the feeding of the hungry?
Right.
Right? What amendment do you have there that ensures the um what his philosophy says is how do you treat the immigrant?
Right.
Do you invite them into your home? Like, is there an amendment for that, or is it just handled through legal policies? Like, how do you do that part? But there'd be no
Yeah.
question in his mind that you should have those things,
Right.
because if you're going to
Yeah.
talk about his religion and his teachings in relationship to government policy, like the vast majority of American Christians today uh, do not advocate for government policy that would align with Christian theological teachings. That's
Yep.
why I say about the Beatitudes, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that, and I think that that's a interesting concept. I was debating on what book to read next. I've been on this like religious tour, is what I call it. Because I also practice, right? As I'm studying a religion, I like to, you know, kind of immerse myself in the actual
Sure.
practice and the culture. It is somewhat difficult for some of the religions that I've studied,
Hmm.
but it's kind of like getting the inside scoop. And I, you know, you spend all that time in the military and you have this picture of what the enemy looks like, and that enemy becomes familiar, right? You know, when you spend time in Afghanistan and you're given this
Yeah.
picture of someone, that's the enemy. This is what the enemy believes in. They're an extremist of Islam. Um, and then you come back to the States, but, or even in country, you realize the enemy is one person, not a group of people. It's this enemy that we are led to believe. And there was actually, I've seen a lot of posts lately from veterans who served overseas, and more so like combat veterans, who, like, I wrote a piece on how beautiful the country of Afghanistan is, because I think most Americans see it as this war zone. And I'm like, it is a beautiful country. It is the plains, the mountains. It's breathtaking. It's a place that people would vacation, but all we see are the burning cars and the war zone. Same thing with the Ukraine. We see the battlefield,
That
but we
like
don't. Yeah,
orangish yellow filter they always put on the camera lens to make
yeah,
it look desert. Yeah.
yeah. And I did the same thing with Ukraine. I'm like, yes, we're seeing the conflict. I'm like, but there's this whole other half of the country.
Hmm.
Like, it shouldn't take away from the beauty. Not just the. I saw another post actually last week. Another veteran posted of the kids, the kids that they interacted with while they were there, right? Just regular kids playing and having fun, and it's like,
Right.
but all you saw was the war zone. So,
Yeah.
um, I think I see a lot of that too is religious intolerance, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how we let it get that far, considering our value system.
Well, not that it helps, but it maybe lessens the struggle to a degree to simply recognize that religion throughout the entirety of human history has represented that kind of conflict. So it's not new, is all I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
not that that makes it right, not that that makes it good or anything of that nature, but I just mean that maybe it help you accept it a little easier if you realize, well, it's kind of always been here.
Hmm.
But that just makes the solution, if we're going to talk about solutions again, like
Yeah.
that much more complex. How do we find a solution to that situation? Um, and I truly believe that that the idea of what America is supposed to be is an eloquent solution to that. A government by, of, and for the people that does not play around in religious doctrine at all, right? Go back to that clause of the Treaty of Tripoli. It was included for a reason. They wanted to be clear that religion was not a driving factor for how the government conducted its business. That's all.
Right.
The humans within that government have to make their decisions based upon whatever philosophical or theological belief systems they hold, of course. But that's their personal relationship with God again, whatever God they have. The government itself is supposed to have no religious connotation to its functioning and operations. And I think that and what I was hesitating on a minute ago is like the idea of how the United States is supposed to function on that front is so much different than how it does right now. Like George Washington said in his farewell address about things relating to foreign relations, that like we should never have these deeply held connections to a foreign nation, right? They should always be loosely held because those governments are going to change, right? Like what happened with France shortly after the American Revolution is the French had their own revolution, but it was the French monarchy that supported us in
Right.
our revolution. And then they got overthrown by the people, and then the people installed their own government. And we're sitting here like, well, wait, how do we interact with that? Right? George Washington said, let's stay out of it because it's
Yeah.
not our place, right? Like they helped us by their own choice. We're appreciative of that, but that doesn't obligate us to. But other people argued the reverse. They're like, well, now they're battling for liberty as well. We have to support liberty. Liberty everywhere is beneficial for liberty at home, or I mean, I think my point though is simply that our government is supposed to function in this way that does not um, glorify war.
Right.
And I don't think that's been true for over 100 years in how our government operates. But if our government did operate in that way, that fundamental base founding belief that war should not be our primary operation or our primary function, um, I don't know. I mean, my mind moves a million miles an hour around stuff like this, but like if the budget for the State Department was as big as the budget for the Department of Defense, like our diplomacy would be legendary.
Yeah, or the Department of War, if you will, to completely contradict what we're saying right now. It's literally called the Department of War now. No, I think that's a really good point. I would love to see a moment in time where we're not in some sort of conflict or in someone else's business. I think we I think the undertone that's become extremely more apparent is that a lot of what we're doing, and when I said that the Martin Luther King quote was weaponized, it was because of that. A threat to democracy anywhere was taken out of context. He meant anywhere in the United States and, the world, but from a humanitarian
Sure.
standpoint, people should be treated fairly. And the government's like, "Oh yeah, that's good. That's a good reason to go to war." Like, and they took that. And I think that that concept
Yeah.
of, well, we need to establish a democracy here. We need to teach them the right way to do things, rather than just appreciating the way that they do things and learning to work together with countries that are under certain, not necessarily democracies, but like Afghanistan, how we interjected ourselves there in the 70s. I don't think that that
Oh,
was,
yeah, that one.
yeah, I don't think that was necessarily our place, but we got ourselves in someone else's mix. And I think that that's a good point. Although there is former
I think
CIA, sorry, go ahead.
I think there's something to be analyzed there around what you're saying in the realm of like what constitutes a threat to democracy anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like if we are going to take that quote at face value and just analyze that, like how did we come to the conclusion that some of these actions were necessary? What was the actual threat to democracy? Like what was the
Yeah.
did a threat exist? And I think a lot of times the answer is going to be no. I assume this is probably where you were about to go, but
Yeah.
what was the CIA reference you were bringing up?
Yeah. Sarah Adams is a former CIA intel, boots on ground type person operator who talks a lot about our conflict overseas. And I think she's incredibly intelligent. I think she has some really good insight into current threat landscape as a security professional. What I don't agree with is that, taking a potential threat, a nation state actor type thing, and using that as a reason why the United States needs to interject itself. Oh, well, we need to do this because that guy's a bad guy and he's in that country. So we should go,
Right.
support this side of the conflict. Speaking about Palestine, we should go support that side of the conflict, because of this one bad guy, the Hamas. But I'm like, is that a true justification? Is that really a threat to our country, or is it
Right.
a potential threat if they exist? But does that does that potential go away once we are in that war and once the war is over? No, they're not. That's not the only threat to the United States if we're talking about a nation state actor. So that's a part of her philosophy and justification for conflict overseas and American intervention. Um, I've never agreed with that. I I think that unless someone can clearly define why we need to do this as a threat to the United States, I don't see why we're sending our troops overseas.
Yeah, I think you're asking the same question I said. Like, what is the actual threat here
Yeah,
that that requires the spilling of American blood?
yeah.
Yeah,
So, kind of getting back to your book, though, the
yeah,
book that's coming out, or I guess by the time this video is released, will be out.
yeah.
What's the goal? What's your goal? And not just writing it, because I can think of a million reasons why you would write it and what I would love to see come from it. But what was your goal in writing it?
I love that question. My goal has, from the very beginning, been to add to that conversation. I talked about what I saw, I believed was missing from the conversation, and I believe is still missing in large chunks, at least, if not almost completely in some ways. Still missing from the conversation today is what exactly are our founding principles. And I think the reason that certain words were chosen by reviewers to talk about this book is that I come with the receipts. Like, this is not an opinion piece. This is a conversation piece. This is meant to show some receipts that say, look, we've got. Let me give you a clear example. Okay, we talked about very briefly, we mentioned immigration, but we did talk at length about the Constitution and then the Declaration of Independence. We talked about the list of grievances. When you think of the grievances of the Declaration of Independence, is there one that stands out, like the one you remember from civics class or something like that? What was our big complaint?
No, there's none that stand out. What stands out to you?
The one most people would probably say, as soon as I say it, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I know that one. Taxation without representation, right?
Okay.
You've heard that. That was a
Yeah.
big complaint we had.
Yeah.
Okay. That's number 17 on the list here. Number 7 on the list. So 10 slots higher was that the Crown of England had endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners and refusing to pass laws to encourage their migrations hither. It was a high crime in the minds of the founding fathers. It was a high crime for a government to oppose immigration. That's right here. This is the Declaration of Independence. Direct text.
Yep.
This is what I say. I come with the receipts. Like, you cannot call yourself an American and be opposed to immigration. It's right here in the Declaration of Independence. That is a high crime.
Yeah.
How do we talk about it then? Let's have a real conversation about it, because of course it should be like controlled, like people talk about open borders and bullshit like that. But, you know, like that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm saying it's a high crime for a government to oppose immigration.
Right.
That is foundational to the United States. If you oppose immigration, you know, get out. You don't deserve to be here, because that is not foundational to the United States. So this is what I'm saying about the conversation. If we can sit here and have a conversation, if this is what my book can add to the conversation, that's the purpose of my book. If I can get people to sit here and say, okay, this is what the founding texts of our government say. We have to be for immigration. How can we do that effectively? That's the real conversation. But if the conversation is like, no, we should just be opposed to immigration, we just need to stop all people coming into the country. Okay, you're committing the same crime that the Crown of England committed. So, you know, get the fuck out. Like, this is not even a conversation. We've already agreed that the foundation of the United States is to say that that's a crime.
So my guess would be you were outraged when the current administration stopped immigration processing.
Outraged, like, you know, you make me sound like some like, you know, angry guy on his TikTok
No,
page.
you're very
like,
even keel.
The receipts are right here.
Yeah, I would
like,
be. I mean,
it's not
I
just
was outraged.
They are committing treason.
Right.
That's the word that I think doesn't get thrown around enough with this particular administration, because this is not this guy who wrote some book's opinion.
Right.
It's in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people are going to be like, well, that's not law. No, it's not law, but it's foundational philosophy of the United States. You want to call yourself an American? You better understand what all 27, legend.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to call yourself an American, you should understand exactly what all 27 of these grievances mean. And you're going to have a real hard time realizing that MAGA politicians have supported almost every single one of those grievances in our government in the last 10 years.
Well, I can tell you that I was outraged. I'm not as even keel as you at certain times. I was outraged having found out that we were just like stopping stuff. We're like, you know what? This is not going very well. We're just going to halt everything. I'm like, that's not how you fix stuff. Like, you have people that have been waiting 10 years. And then during the first Trump administration, he established this fast track to citizenship if you could pay.
Mm-hmm.
If you could pay more, then you could become a U.S. citizen in a reasonable amount of time. And anytime an application came in from somebody who could pay, it went to the top of the stack. So anybody else who had been waiting and doing what they're supposed to be doing and going through the process, they were moved down because of those folks that could pay. And to me, I thought that was exploiting the system. Now, don't get me wrong, it's most,
What does it say?
immigration.
It says obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners. I mean, it sounds like he that policy
Yeah.
was exactly that. I'm
Yeah.
obstructing the naturalization of foreigners by creating a pay-to-play system.
Yeah.
So again, a president, an administration, and our government being guilty of exactly the grievances that
Yep.
the founding fathers said were so bad of a thing for a government to do that we need to sever ourselves from that government and have a new one. So now we're going to commit the same fucking crimes and call ourselves Americans? No, you're
Yeah.
committing treason.
And that was during his
treasonous,
first
traitorous
administration.
bullshit. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It was during his first administration. And then what I saw when Biden came in was like, well, shit, this is already kicked off. How do we speed up this process? So he was like, well, the fee-based thing is kind of working. We just don't have enough people. So the people who've been waiting 10 years now have to wait 15. So he went ahead and just hired as many immigration service officers as he could. This way, everyone had a fair shot. So there's people dedicated to the fast track, and everybody else continued what they were doing. And we were actually able to process faster and the right way, right? Well, the right way. So we went through our criteria and the backgrounds and all that other stuff. I recommend that every single person go to a naturalization ceremony. It is the most beautiful thing. I did it once at Dodger Stadium and naturalized 10,000 people, right? Sometimes you do like big ones, but
I like that.
I think it's absolutely incredible. And like to really drive home what it means to these people to become American citizens, I think it's things that we take for granted because we're born here. A lot of them, that had to hire people, work through language barriers, all while busting their ass to be here. Some of them weren't even here while they were fighting to become American citizens. They were in their home country,
Right.
had applied multiple times, maybe not passed the test the first time, which the test they made it more difficult, right? They added 150 extra questions this last couple years. So I think every single person should go to.
And I've seen the analysis on those tests. How many high school graduates of America, born and raised in the United States, citizens who can't answer those questions.
Yep. And then the test itself, just the test, not the process, went up by $250 this year. $250. So now I think it's $750 for test and application. And if you fail, you have to pay again. But you only have a short window. So if, because you're only allowed to, be here to take that test or even in your country, $750 is a lot of money in most places, especially where a majority of our application pool is coming from. Not always, but yeah, that's still a lot of money. So I find it interesting, but also going to those naturalization ceremonies, if that doesn't make you want to improve the process, like just seeing the people and how happy they are with their whole family here. Yeah, I think every person should witness at least one naturalization ceremony.
I agree. I think it puts into real life terms and understanding of what's inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, and to see these people like get through that process and now getting to breathe free as desired, right? That's exactly what we're supposed to be about. And improving the process, making it less expensive, less of a barrier, less of an obstruction, right? Like these are all debates that we can legitimately have. Yeah. But it's still this debate around how do we facilitate, not do we allow it?
What's interesting and what I would love to hear more people talk about, I have my own opinion on it, but our citizenship office is a fee-based agency. They do not receive funding from the government. They run and operate based on the application fees. And I think that is a huge fucking problem.
Yeah.
Because they almost operate autonomously, like government shutdown, untouched, which is great. They can continue to work and process applications. But I also think that removes some of the government oversight. Now, they still have a congressionally appointed leader, if you will. And there are still, laws and things like that come into play. But I think once you start to mess with folks' money, then, like all the other agencies that shut down that were in uproar, I think if that applied to the Citizenship and Immigration Office, it's twofold, right? Like, people aren't going to work, so they can't process applications. So then we're stuck in that long timeline. But two, I think the American people would have more of a say and could pressure our elected officials to
Sure.
move that organization the way we want it to move. Whereas right now, no one's really protesting citizenship and immigration because CIS is not on the Congress floor mad because their money was shut. They're not receiving money because the government shut down. So it's like this vicious cycle of, do you continue to be a fee-based agency, or do you become congressionally funded, but then also be impacted by government shutdowns, which will impact the immigration system? But I think there's a lack of oversight when it comes to that. And, that has always been a little bit of my problem. And citizenship and immigration was always an administrative organization. But Trump just allowed them all to become law enforcement. So now it's a law enforcement agency like ICE.
Mhm.
So the organization that's supposed to be helping folks naturalize and become U.S. citizens is now also the police force.
Sounds like conflict of interest in a.
It's now you know why I retired. I was like, this I have a problem with. And I just don't, I think that there's so many conversations that need to be had, but it's like, where does it end? There's so many things we need to talk about that are so messed up because our government's operating independently.
Well, I'll give you one little preview, like I talked about the 5 Amendment solution, my second book, and then so the third amendment that I'm going to propose is going to be this sort of sweeping change to how businesses and government interact and taxes. And I think the tax question is very, very, very much related to what you're talking about, because I think somewhat of like a one of the deeper levels of political discourse in our country is like, but who's going to pay for it? That's always what things kind of get boiled down to, is like, well, universal health care sounds great, but who's going to pay for it? That's what the opposition says. And then, like immigration, like you're talking about, like, sure, we would love to be this, like, paragon of immigration law in the world, but who's going to pay for it, right? And I think the preview that I'm going to offer to you is that, like, I do believe that the United States government should pay for it. And then, but I know what the other people, well, where do they get their money, right? From taxes, right? And it's mostly income tax. Like, yes, that's true. If you look at the revenues of the United States government, the majority of it comes from taxing individuals. And I'm going to propose in my amendment here, abolition of income tax. Human beings exist above the government, right? We talked about this. I said that humans are born with unalienable rights, and then we say in the Declaration of Independence that we're going to allow governments to exist in order to secure our rights. So the government works for us, not the other way around. If we're thinking hierarchy here, like,
Right.
you and I are military people, we kind of tend to look at things in a hierarchy. Like, at the very top is the people. Then comes the government. And then the government does a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like, they allow corporations to exist, and they might be C Corp or S Corp or LLCs or partnerships or whatever. Like, they have all these like processes and policies and stuff in place to allow all these other sort of entities to exist underneath the government. So all of those entities only exist by the grace of the government, and the government only exists by the grace of the people. So when it comes to a hierarchy here, like, how on earth is it allowed for the government to tax the people above it in the hierarchy? That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Right? The government should only be allowed to tax the things lower than it in the hierarchy. So there should be zero income tax. No human should pay income tax whatsoever, period, end of story. But businesses should pay tax regardless. And
Right.
so I will propose, this might go a step beyond what I will say in my book or in the amendment, but I would propose that, like, basically it'd be sales tax.
Right.
That we're not going to tax corporations on their profit, because that's how corporations get away with paying zero profit, right? Is that they set up some shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, and then they make billions of dollars in revenue. Then they report all these like fake or inflated expenses that get their profit down to a small amount. And then they have this shell corporation in the Cayman Islands that they pay some like fee to, and that fee happens to be exactly the amount of profit they have left over. So
Yeah.
now they report zero profit
Yeah.
in the United States, so they pay zero taxes. This is
Yep.
how corporations, and I'm not talking like, owned by the mob. I'm talking about, Apple and Google, and these corporations are literally doing stuff like I just described to
Yeah.
avoid paying taxes to the United States government. So my proposal is every transaction that every single corporation makes gets taxed like it's sales tax, right? And if you taxed everything with like 5% sales tax, like a federal sales tax, is what I'm saying. If you tax like every transaction that businesses conduct with like 5%, that would probably close to triple the revenues of the United States government.
Would we remove state taxes and it would just be the singular tax, or would there also have to be the state tax follow the same thing?
Yeah, I think states have a right to like do things their own way. That comes out of the Constitution, right? Like state governments are still necessary, still important, still valuable, and they need to make their own choices based upon their own constituency. But my proposal is an amendment to the Constitution that would make federal income tax outlawed.
Yeah.
Basically force the government into a place where it has to tax corporations.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm working in here in my mind, I'm not talking about taxing billionaires, which I know might offend some of those, like,
yeah.
You remember what I said? I'm anti-partisan, not nonpartisan. So I don't necessarily agree with either side of the political spectrum. I don't care about taxing billionaires because they're just individuals. So I think they should be equally protected. But those fuckers only have their billions because of what they own in the corporations. And they keep their wealth locked up in the corporations so that they personally have actually very little wealth.
Right.
This is part of the problem that we face because we can't actually tax these billionaires directly, the human being, because that human being is not actually worth all that much money. He's just the owner of a certain LLC or something like that. That the LLC in turn owns these umbrella corporations, and those corporations own all these stocks in these big companies and so. But they have these convoluted structures to avoid actually having very much wealth in their own personal name.
Right.
And I don't care about that.
Elon Musk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care what
mind. Yeah.
I don't care about that. I'm saying change the whole structure to the top line.
Right.
You know what I said? Every corporate transaction, every bit of revenue they make gets taxed at a very small amount, like 4 or 5%, whatever, right? Like we can do the math later. But the idea is that we tax just like sales tax, just like everything gets taxed sales tax. But I would want to tax both services and products, not just physical products.
Yeah.
Everything at the revenue line of a company gets taxed. And then beyond that, like, who cares, right? Like, they want to pay their shareholders great big dividends, and rich people want to keep their wealth tied up in their shell corporations and their umbrella corporations, and they want to do that kind of stuff for, like, whatever reasons they have. That's fine. I don't see a problem with that, because the individual should have that freedom, should have that right to keep things structured. But those corporations only get to exist and operate and conduct these transactions because our government lets it.
Right.
So they got to pay to play. They got to pay for the right to operate in our country that we allow that government to exist. We the people allow the government to exist. The government then lets the corporations do business, but they got to pay to play. So every single transaction should have that tax on it. And then whatever the corporations do with the rest of their money, there probably still needs to be certain regulations and things with the SEC to make sure that, like, the individual people are not being taken advantage of by the great big conglomerate corporations. Sure, that's a different conversation. I'm just talking about the tax revenue of the United States government. And if you do that kind of thing, going all the way back to what you said, funding something like immigration services is like drops in the bucket.
Right.
Right? Like we're taxing these corporations at such high dollar amounts for such low tax rates. Like we could get rid of people paying income tax and fund our government better and pay off our national debt and fund additional services and like be able to give members of the armed forces massive pay raises that they deserve to have. Like, we could do all of this and get rid of income tax. Yes, we
Yeah,
could.
I do. I think the resistance is going to come from elected officials who are lining their pockets. I follow, what is it called? Um, was it a Politic Trader? I think is what it's called, where it tracks the investments of elected officials, congressional officials,
Yeah,
and
I've seen it.
yeah, and I find it absolutely fascinating. I've actually, I was like, yeah, I'll throw $100 in this and see what happens, and it is insane what happens. Just following the trend lines, especially that insider knowledge. I think it was AOC who proposed that we remove the ability for elected officials to invest in corporations, like just completely taken out. And then there's obviously like a lot
Yeah,
of back and forth with that. But I thought it'd be interesting, like what happens if you can't invest? Would you still be a billionaire or a millionaire when you leave Congress, if you ever leave Congress? I'd love to see term limits. There's a lot of things I think need to happen.
that's
Um,
one of the other amendments that fixes some of those things.
yeah,
In my book, in my second book, one of the I kind of have them lumped into groups, like,
yeah,
so each of these 5 amendments will be somewhat wide reaching, but one of them is I'm looking at term limits. I'm looking at um, definitely limiting any ability for corporations to be involved in
hmm,
politics, because go back to that hierarchy, right? Like, the people allow the government to exist, the government allows the corporations to exist, therefore the corporations should have absolutely 100% zero influence in the government, because the government
yeah,
lets them exist. The government does its job because it's serving the people. The government answers to the people. We all say that, we all think it, we all kind of know it's like theoretically true, but it's not actually how it operates right now, because we let corporate money get into politics. So the
yeah,
amendment I'm going to propose would be a like hard line 100% removal of all corporate influence in politics whatsoever.
yeah. The Economist, I believe. I'll find the video and I'll add a link. They kind of backtracked after the last election where some of that lobbyist money was coming from, because obviously they don't have to say, who
Right.
they're investing in. But through various means and methods and SEC reports, right, that are required quarterly, some of these reporters were actually able to track the money that was spent on certain political campaigns and what corporations it came from, and then how that's played out during that individual's term. And it's absolutely awful to
Oh
see
yeah.
how influenced folks are by that money. But at the same time, it's like, well, no shit. They're
It's
not
yeah,
investing
it's
millions of dollars for
absolutely
no
direct
reason.
corruption.
Yeah.
We can say the word. It's absolute corruption, and we know it, and we
Yeah.
see it happening. And the only way to combat it is to 100% remove all possibility of corporate influence in government. Right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to propose, is that in this amendment, is that, and I have very specific mechanisms by which I think that's achievable. But it comes back to the democracy piece. Right? A corporation is not a democracy, right? It has its shareholders. Its shareholders do some votes and select the C-suite members of the corporation, and then the C-suite members do the rest. So there's like a slight kind of resemblance of a democratic process there. But at the end of the day, the corporation and the C-suite executives are only then serving the shareholders, which is something. I mean, this will come out in my third book by the time I get around to reading it, but it's called the fallacy of shareholder supremacy, which is one of the downfalls of capitalism in the United States in the last 50 years, is that we have allowed for the fallacy of shareholder supremacy to become policy, to become
Yeah.
standard. Like, we somehow made the argument that fiduciary responsibility necessitates the fallacy of shareholder supremacy, and it absolutely doesn't, right? Like, the reality is that these corporations serve massive groups of people, not just the shareholders, but the employees. The
Yeah.
corporation has an obligation to its employees, and then its customers, right? Like, let's talk about customers, right? And we could be talking about global customer base, something like Coca-Cola or Apple or whatever, right? Like, they serve an almost global community, and they have an obligation to that community. my point about money comes back to the corporate influence, is that when the corporation decides that they're going to give this money to some super PAC that's going to fund a specific candidate, how many people are involved in that decision? It's undemocratic.
Right.
Like the amount of people necessary to generate the billions are not represented in the choice of which campaign to fund with those billions.
Right.
So that's why we don't have a government by, of, and for the people today, because the people are not being represented in the choice of how to spend all that money. So that's why we need to eliminate even the remotest possibility of corporate money being given to campaigns.
I used to say this thing when I was still in service. When I was working for the government, I would say I have a fiduciary responsibility to the American taxpayer, not to the organization, not to the agency. I'm not here to save you money or to report to Congress and ask Congress for more money. It's my responsibility to spend the American taxpayer money in a way that helps and supports the American taxpayer. And people hated that because I would say no to things, and I would propose that we shift funding in a different direction, and folks hated that. And at one point, I changed my my signature to that statement. I have a fiduciary responsibility to the American taxpayer, and it's usually around the fiscal year, like the end of the fiscal year, when we were talking about next year. And it was like, if you're going to come with me because you don't agree with how I want to spend the money, read my signature block, because I'm not here for you. I'm not here for you. And I think that folks in the government sector as well, it's just interesting to me because, like, if we went out, even as friends, and you wanted to talk to me about the work I was doing, and I was still a federal employee, I am not allowed to even let you buy me a cup of coffee because of conflict of interest. But, we have elected officials who are getting flown overseas or taken to big corporate dinners by these corporations, and that's okay. But if I go out into town to a conference and the local police chief wants to sit down and talk to me about policy and he wants to buy lunch, I can't do that. It's conflict of interest. Honestly, having the conversation would be an issue, and I'd have to report it through an official government chain to let them know that I sat down and talked about work stuff. But then you see the people I'm reporting to not following that same policy because it technically doesn't apply to them, is how the policy is written. I'm like, that is so interesting. But that aside, so how many other books do you have in the pipeline? Because you just mentioned a third. What's the dream board looking like?
The dream board. Well, I mean, it's like, so there's these two books specifically about the American government. So the one coming out on the 14th, when anybody will be able to pick that up by the time this video comes out. The preview for the 5 amendment solution is at the back of this book, so you'll get just a little taster of that one if you make it that far. And then beyond that, I think the majority of my focus is outside of government and more in the philosophy of business. Right? I talked about the fallacy of shareholder supremacy, but I mean, like, corporations have an obligation to serve their community.
Which CSR.
Yeah. It's it's not like, this is not ethereal, right? This is real. Like, corporations don't actually make money unless they give something of value to their customer, right? Whether that's a service or a product, right? Like, they have to provide something of value. But that leads to all kinds of problems, right? Things like planned obsolescence and, I digress. My point is that, like, yes, all kinds of problems can come out of how do we, so what I guess I'm trying to say is that my books, beyond the government books, are going to focus on how do we hold corporations accountable to their role in society, right? We allow corporations to exist because we allow the government to exist. The government works for us. The government lets those corporations exist. At the end of the day, these corporations are just artificial constructs of humanity, and they exist to serve us.
Right.
They exist only for the purpose of making our lives better.
Yeah.
So how do we hold them accountable to that in a viable way? Like, I don't want to put corporations out of business. I don't want to like cause us to regress to the Stone Age or some shit, or, you know, like nothing like that. I'm just saying, like, there are legitimate ways, absolutely, that we can hold corporations accountable to something other than profit maximization as a metric of success. So that's
Yeah.
what my future books will look like. I mean, I think somewhere in there might be my own PhD program. I've been looking at various schools, including like Oxford and University of Edinburgh and places like that, as places I might want to go for a PhD program. And my PhD would definitely focus on this corporate responsibility in society kind of viewpoint. So not so much on American government pieces. So it'll definitely be these 2 books on American government. And then beyond that, you'll probably see a number of books from me about corporate responsibility.
Yeah, it sounds like you're moving to that next layer of that hierarchy that you talked about. I would be interested. So I looked at corporate social responsibility in business school because I have a doctorate in business, although the specialization is in Homeland Security. But
Mm-hmm.
during that business piece, I learned a lot, especially as an entrepreneur at that time. And one of the things that I found incredibly interesting was something that India actually did, where, in the United States, we say, hey, corporations have a responsibility to not just provide something of value, but to improve the communities in which they operate. So if you're building a Coca-Cola factory in the middle of somewhere, what are you doing to improve the quality of life and to support the community that you're now going to operate in? But that's all we said. You got to do something. India took it a step further and said, no. Like, yeah, you have to do something, but that do something has to be at least, I think it's like 10% of your bottom line. So then, there's that number fudging, and they came back and they said, no. Before that, before that bottom line, that line right before that, if your if your
EBITDA or
revenue
something like
stream,
that.
yeah, if your revenue stream is 10 billion, 10% of that needs to go back into the communities that you're operating in. So
Yeah,
they
that's what
gave
I'm
them
saying.
hard boundaries, whereas the United States just said, hey, you have to have a CSR when your corporation reaches a certain point, and that also includes registration with the SEC. But that's it. So if Coca-Cola in the United States spends $10 and plants a tree or a bush somewhere, they can say, yep, did our CSR. Check in the
Right.
box.
Yeah. Because there's
But
no
yeah,
minimum or something like that.
yeah, and that's where India, I thought, was pretty interesting. There's other countries that have unique ways of doing that, but India turned around and said, no, we're going to tell you how much, and it's going to be a certain percentage of what you're making, profitable or not. So yeah, and obviously, it gets incorporated into prices and projections. But if a company is if 10% is a couple $100 million, that's quite substantial.
And Americans get so bent out of shape about that kind of thing, and I can't, for the life of me, fathom why. Like, why do they get so upset about us regulating corporations? Like, corporations are just these artificial entities that have no real purpose or value. Their function is to serve communities, right? And if we're just forcing them to actually do that, I don't see the problem. And especially when, India institutes a law like that, and guess what? Coca-Cola and Apple are still opening factories there. So clearly it's possible to do.
Yeah.
Otherwise well, I can't make money now because of these laws, so I'm not going to open a factory. That would be the decision-making process, right? But if they were like, well, okay, we're still opening our factory, clearly they're still going to make a profit, even though
Right.
they're required to do these kinds of things. And like,
Yep.
so what are Americans all up in arms about? I just don't get it sometimes, that
Yeah.
we have all this like pent up anger about like freedom. And like, okay, with corporations, like freedom for corporations. What?
Yeah.
They're not real. Like, they don't need freedom, and corporations don't go in the same sentence, because they're not like, freedom is a human thing.
Yeah.
Corporations just need to be regulated to make sure they're not fucking assholes. Like,
Yeah.
like, can we just get on with it?
No, I totally get that. But so I want to wrap this up. We'll probably have to have a part 2, because I think you and I could talk and unpack a lot of stuff here. I know that I'm learning
Sure.
a lot, so that I appreciate that, and I would pick your brain all day. Where can folks buy your book? And I'll include links once it's actually published, which it's only a couple days away. But where will your book be available for sale?
Everywhere. So I have recorded the audiobook myself. So if you prefer audiobooks, you can hear me read my own book. And that'll be available on all the audio platforms. The books will be available on Amazon, be available through your local bookstore. You can have them ordered if they don't have it already. Anywhere you buy books, you should be able to find The Conclusion of the American Experiment.
Awesome. And I'll find a few links and I'll throw them in the video description. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you again. And yeah, you're like, hey, that's me.
That's me.
Thank you again. I also want to highlight that this is an actual published book, not a self-published book. I know that I got some hate last time I didn't make that distinction. Some of the comments were like, this is self-published. And I'm like, it's still published. But I'm looking forward to reading.
I don't know where that line is. Like self-published. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, that's something that we could also unpack. It's interesting to me, but I think more so people are upset because a lot of folks are just generating books using AI and then slapping a cool cover on it and throwing it on Amazon. Different. But I think that there are some people that are actually writing books and publishing them themselves, and those.
That's what I did.
Yeah, it just
This represents actual intelligence, not artificial. Yeah. So maybe that kind of AI. But yes, this was years of study from me after joining the military and pre-military, but definitely after joining that. Like I felt like I had to study our history. Like if I'm going to take my oath to the Constitution that could result in giving my life for it, I better understand what I'm actually giving my life for.
Yeah.
Or potentially giving my life for, right? Like, I mean, so yes, over a decade's worth of study went into this book. So no, it is not AI slop.
Yeah, folks I think that's where the uproar is coming from, is that AI made book is thrown on the, Amazon, because Amazon has their own publishing platform, and then that's it. And then like 25 different variations of that book, each with a different cover and maybe a different title, also come out. And that is the issue, and it becomes extremely apparent while you're reading it that there's a lot of issues with the content, obviously, especially if someone's not actually reading through it. But you are not that. So there's the distinction. I had somebody on who had also published a book, but it was self-published. They put it on Amazon store, and it was actually written by them. I had seen the manuscript. I had seen the edits. They actually hired an independent editor, but published it themselves rather than going through a publisher. And I didn't say that. I didn't make that distinction. And I was like, well, because I knew the book was written by him. Like, and we went through the process you would go through if you had it published by some big corporation or some publisher. It's the same thing. The book's still cut, still quality content.